Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of the Samuel Luckhurst Show on the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm recording this on Friday morning. Ruben Amorim's press conference will be later on this afternoon, the usual time of 1:15 with an embargo of 1:30. That seems to be United's preferred choice now, which is a lot better for us than it was earlier in the season when Erik ten Hag was having some press conferences at 4 p.m. on Thursdays. I think it was in ahead of the Premier League game at the weekend. So that has been a welcome. I think the welcome change of manager even extends to the press conference times. It's obviously been a quiet week, relatively speaking, for United, where they've not had a game, not had a midweek game, but there has still been plenty going on that we'll discuss and get through, or I'll discuss, I should say, and get through, having been at Dennis Law's funeral on the Tuesday and the FA Youth Cup tie on the Wednesday against Chelsea at Lee Sports Village. And we'll start with that because that felt like the best, certainly the most feel-good story for Manchester United this week, thrashing Chelsea 5-1 in the FA Youth Cup, the two most successful teams in the competition. I didn't quite realise there would be quite the gulf in class between them. Chelsea monopolised the Youth Cup for about a 5-year period in the 2010s, up until United beat them in the third round in December 2018. That was the last time the teams played at Lee Sports Village in the competition. And that night in December 2018, Mason Greenwood scored a hat-trick, and then history kind of repeated itself with Chido Obi Martin scoring a hat-trick on Wednesday night. However, he's no longer known as Chido Obi Martin. Apparently, it's now just Chido Obi. And that was something that I think a colleague, it might have been Nathan Salt, had asked about. He was in the press box as well at Lee, but we notice on the team sheet that it's now just Chido Obi, and apparently Martin used to be his middle name. If you believe Steven Railston, that's not me denigrate Stephen whatsoever. This will obviously be some guidance from the club, but Stephen did put out on Thursday afternoon that United have confirmed it's Chido Obi and not Chido Obi Martin. His middle name is Martin, and the player has apparently asked for it to be dropped. Now, if his middle name was Martin, why the hell it was ending up as part of his surname or his last name, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if this is foreshadowing Chido Obi's international allegiance, where he's eligible to play for Nigeria or Denmark, the country of his birth. So I think for Nigerian fans, that's potentially very exciting if they're going to have a player who's already played in Arsenal's academy and is now in United's academy representing them. But as far as his performance was concerned, he's now got 7 goals in 3 Youth Cup games. That's as many Youth Cup goals as Alejandro Garnacho scored a few seasons ago, and in half as many games. So he is as prolific as it sounds. His goal scoring records are quite renowned at youth level from his time at Arsenal. That has continued with United. He has played for the under-21s a couple of times recently as well. I suspect he will completely, pretty much bypass that level just because of the needs of the first team and how well he's doing at academy level. This will be his one proper academy season. I would imagine there's a very good chance he'll be playing first team football next season. If not for United, then somewhere on loan, because that's the rate he's developing at. He towers over centre backs. He towered over the referee in the week. He is clinical in front of goal, certainly for the equalising goal, and that was the only aberration on United's night against Chelsea. They should have been ahead before Chelsea went 1-0 up. But when Chido Obi was sent through for the equalising goal, you just knew he wasn't going to miss. It was so well taken. And when he's got that opportunity, when he's got a sniff, you just feel there's that sense of inevitability about him, and hopefully for his case that transcends to first team level when he gets that opportunity, whenever that may be. I think the way it's going for him at the moment, you would not be surprised if he makes his Manchester United debut at some point this season. There are going to be a lot of opportunities to train with the first team, simply because of the amount of games that United have in the run-in, where they've got midweek commitments in the Europa League. That'll come up again from next month. So recovery days for players, that means you have to draft in players from the academy for the training sessions the following day, or the day after a Premier League match at the weekend. You're going to need some players to supplement the training session on the Monday. But I don't think Chido Obi has done a lot of training so far under Ruben Amorim. That really has to change, given the progress he's made at academy level, and just the struggles that Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee have had in front of goal. I'm not necessarily suggesting that Chido Obi is ready at first team level yet. I think you look at him and he's still very gangly. He's going to have to fill out a little bit more to become robust enough to play against men, to play men's football, to put it frankly. But the potential is definitely there. In midweek, he imitated Marcus Rashford with his celebration, and as I said earlier, he emulated Mason Greenwood by scoring a hat trick against Chelsea at Lee. They've been consigned to United's past, and Chido Obi, that was my mistake there, certainly looks like he could be the future. There are pieces up, and they have been up for a good while now, from Lee Sports Village, for myself and Steven Railston. Steven did the report, having covered the previous Youth Cup matches at Lee. I did a colour piece, unsurprisingly, on Chido Obi, given the buzz around him. I did watch him at Rochdale in December in the National League Cup, and he came on as a substitute, had a good impact. I think he got the assist for Amir Ibrahimov's winning goal that evening. So I've seen him twice in the flesh, and it's impossible not to be impressed by him on either occasion. And of course, you don't want to overhype him. And as I've said already, I don't think he's ready for first team football yet. But United have certainly got to look at integrating him into the first team squad at some stage this season. But as Amram cautioned when I asked him about Chido Obi last week, the focus, the priority is to get Højlund and Zirkzee up to speed, because United have invested more than £100 million in them, and they are senior strikers. One's 22, one's 23. And they should be doing better. Højlund's only got 7 goals this season. I think Xerxes now got 5 goals after his impact against Leicester last week. But they've got to start contributing goals, particularly in the run-in. We're coming up to the cliched business end of the season. If United are to be remotely successful, they are going to have match winners in their team, whether it's in the Europa League or the FA Cup. It is possible to fluke a cup competition whilst not scoring a lot of goals. I wouldn't say France fluked it when they won the 2018 World Cup, but they went through that tournament without their centre forward Olivier Giroud scoring, and that wasn't really a surprise, because Giroud he had a lot of attributes, and there was a lot to admire about him as a striker for Arsenal, and then with Chelsea in the Premier League. But goal scoring was never really his forte, even though he could score the odd nice goal, and certainly most memorably that Scorpion flick against Crystal Palace a few years ago. It was more than a few years ago, I should say. So he had plenty about him, but he was not someone that you'd look at and think, are Arsenal going to get back to the top with him as goal scorer? No chance. But he did have attributes, and of course in that France squad, he had a wealth of talent around him. He had Mbappe, Griezmann, Paul Pogba. France had an awesome defence as well. They had N'Golo Kante in midfield. They really should have been winning the World Cup that year. And of course, they did win the World Cup that year. And there's a reason why they got to the final again in Qatar in 2022. But United, it is different, of course. Knockout football, where it's at club level rather than in a condensed month, where the focus is so tight and players are intent on succeeding with their nation. It is a very different dynamic to dipping in and out of cup competitions, when you've also got the bread and butter of the Premier League as well. It is also worth mentioning from that Youth Cup game in midweek how well Jayden Camerson did, the right back. He got 2 assists in the first half, 2 quality assists as well. He looked a really good player, did very well. Just looking at his age, he is 18, so he's already getting on at the risk of worrying him. I hope I won't be saying that, but sometimes when a player hits the 18 mark at academy level, you already see them as as one of the elder statesmen. Chido Obi turned 17 in November. In terms of other performances, Harry Amos didn't have a good start to the game. He had a pretty shaky start. He was bypassed in the first seconds, and he put the ball out a couple of times in the first minutes. But he did get going, and in the end, he had a reasonably comfortable night because United was so productive going forward. James Scanlon certainly deserves an apology. I was probably a little bit hard on him with some ratings during the pre-season tour when he was being played out of position. He was being played at right back during the tour of the United States. He's of course an attacking player, and he got two very well judged goals. Certainly, his headed goal to put United 2-1 up. It was effectively the winning goal on the night. So that will fuel his confidence. He's already a full international with Gibraltar. So at the risk of being a little bit cynical, there is some resale value there already. But if he's to have a good career at United, then credit to him because he's got some good achievements under his belt already. He's scored winners in a big Youth Cup tie against Chelsea. He's already been on a pre-season tour with the first team as well. So that's pretty good progress for him. United did have a couple of players out injured as well the other night, which again, it just shows you the strength and depth that they have at their disposal. Zach Bauman and Mantato, they probably or might have played in the game, but they weren't available. You had Shea Lacey on the bench, who obviously there's been a bit of hype around in recent years. He's also had some injury issues, unfortunately for him, but he came on, looked very confident on the ball. It was a good time to bring him into the game, given that the game was done and dusted, and he was able to showcase his abilities in front of a pretty minuscule crowd. Unfortunately, it was only 738 that turned up to Leigh Sports Village. That is not remotely a criticism of match-going fans whatsoever. It is very much criticism of United and their failure to not stage the game at Old Trafford. Go back 3 years ago, United's Youth Cup ties, all of them were played at Old Trafford, even against Scunthorpe United. That was held at Old Trafford. And of course, the final, because of where United were drawn as the home team, that was also at the stadium. And that, I think it was a crowd of 67,000, so a record crowd for a Youth Cup game. In the quarterfinals, Chido Obi will be going back to Arsenal, his former club, and that will be at the Emirates until that final at Old Trafford in 2022. I think the semi-final between Arsenal and United at the Emirates Stadium in 2007 was a record crowd for a Youth Cup game, and that was the first season that the Emirates was open after Arsenal relocated there from Highbury. So one would be quite optimistic of that being a pretty big crowd. Two of the biggest clubs in England, a Youth Cup game. There's huge interest in youth football, as there always is. It seems to grow every year, but it's not always reflected in the crowds. And the problem that United have, and it's a problem of their own making, is that they opt to rent at Leigh Sports Village, which is, frankly, it's barely in Greater Manchester. There's not a train station there in the town. It's one of the biggest towns in England without a train station. The tram tracks certainly don't venture that far out to Leigh. So the only way you're getting there is by bus or car. And it's tricky for a lot of fans. It's good for the fans in the area. The women's team play there. But really, that match in midweek had to be played at Old Trafford. And the suggestion has been that the INEOS cabal think it's too expensive to open the gates, open the turnstiles for Old Trafford for a Youth Cup game. But I'm absolutely certain that had Old Trafford been open for United Chelsea on Wednesday night, it would have been a crowd in the thousands comfortably. You'd have probably got 2,000 there. They tend to open up the Sir Alex Ferguson stand, the first tier of it, and people just stream on in. I don't think tickets cost anything either, so there's always bound to be interest, especially when it's the academy and a Youth Cup game, and there are players to get excited about and players that fans are already familiar with. Obi is one, Harry Amas is another. The Fletcher twins, both of them started in the week. It's good for Tyler Fletcher that he's had a clear run this season. His first season at the club was just injury laden, unfortunately for him. Jack had a pretty good first year and was able to go on the pre-season tour. Didn't play in the United States, but it was just a great experience for him at that age. But now his twin brother is involved, and they played in front of their father in midweek. And Jason Wilcox was also there in the stands to watch United thrash Chelsea 5-1. So on the academy front, going very, very well. Looks like they should win their league again. It was almost a clean sweep last season as far as honours were concerned for United's under-18s. The only competition they came a cropper in was in the Youth Cup when they were surprisingly beaten 2-0 at Swindon Town, which was a real shock. And the way the draw opened up, they almost certainly, had they got past Swindon, they probably would have got to the final. But that's in the past now, and it seems as though the players who were involved in that major disappointment last year are now making up for it, because at Youth Cup level you get 2 shots at it maximum. It's obviously, if you're over the age of if you're not turning 18 this season, then I should rephrase that. You can play in it up until the age of 18. If you're turning 18 this season, that's absolutely fine. But if you're in the academy and you start the season at 18 and you're turning 19, then you can't play in the Youth Cup. I think Kobe Mainu would have been eligible to play in it in another season. I think it was 2 seasons ago, not last season, but he would have been eligible to still play in it. But of course, where he won it in 2022, it was like, right, that's it, one is done. That will suffice. So I don't think there are too many players out there who have won the FA Youth Cup on 2 occasions. On a much more sombre note, Tuesday was deja vu for some of us who'd attended Kath Phipps's funeral at Manchester Cathedral in January, because we were back at Manchester Cathedral for another United-related funeral, as everyone said, bid farewell to Dennis Law. It was a great turnout, as you'd expect. There were a lot of fans outside there to provide a send-off for one of United's greatest players. There was a fan in a Liverpool jacket. I noticed there were fans of Real Madrid as well. If you know Manchester pretty well, you'll know that Sinclair's Oyster Bar, which is just around the corner and where European fans tend to congregate on match day, that's obviously, it's not a long walk whatsoever to Manchester Cathedral. And when we were leaving after the service, we could hear Real Madrid fans just round the corner, but some of them turned up to pay their respects as well, which was a very very, very dignified and very classy as well. So many of the great and good of Manchester United were there. You'll have seen all the pictures. So Alex Ferguson gave another eulogy, having spoken at Kath Phipps's funeral 4 or 5 weeks earlier. And his first words were, normally I can read off the top of my head, but I can't today. Normally I can speak off the top of my head, but I can't today. That's what he said. So he was visibly emotional at a service for his hero, even though they were pretty much the same age. Ferguson absolutely idolised Dennis Law. Law's daughter, Diana Buckley, probably better known as Di Law from her time working for Manchester United, gave a lovely reading as well that really didn't touch too much on the football. It was more about Dennis Law, the father, the husband. So that gave some insight into what a loving father and husband he was. And there was a beautiful story about how he met his wife, also named Diana, at an Aberdeenshire dance hall, and the date they arranged. And Law had just come back from Torino, and although he didn't like the football out there, he did like the Italian style. So he was in one of these immaculately tailored Italian suits, and he was in his car on the way to meet his future wife for their first date. The car broke down, so he ended up dashing the rest of the way to meet up with her. And I don't think the suit was in as fine a nick as it was when it was first stitched into place by his tailor back in northern Italy. But there, Diana was waiting for him, and they got engaged 6 weeks later. He proposed after 3 weeks. She thought that was too soon, so they waited another 3 weeks, and they were married for more than 60 years. They got a letter from the actual king, King Charles III, in 2022 to commemorate that. Diana passed away last year. Dennis, of course, passed away in January. I know this is becoming possibly quite morbid, but I think a lot of people, they'll have experience of knowing couples who've been together since the aeons of time, and then they pass away quite close together. And there is some comfort in that. I know it will obviously be an extremely difficult time for the Law family, but there is some something to treasure from that, as strange as that may sound. But everyone, as I said, it was a lovely ceremony, as lovely as those ceremonies can be. There was applause for the readings from members of the Law family. Dennis's other daughter, Liz, and his son Ian, they also gave readings. We heard the bagpipes. Flower of Scotland was played. And we heard Dennis Law's voice one last time as a recording of him introducing Angel by Rod Stewart played as his coffin was carried out. And then there was an impromptu round of applause, I think instigated by the supporters who were waiting outside. So it's a strange thing to be speaking about a funeral on a football podcast again, but I was certainly very grateful to be invited to it, as I was to be invited to Kath Phipps's funeral the previous month. I was there with probably half a dozen other colleagues, and it is a privilege to be present for send-offs like that, where you obviously you've kind of known this figure without ever actually knowing him in the most intimate way possible, but still to be present for a send-off like that. As I said, we were all grateful, and you have to do it justice when you're writing a piece from the occasion. I think one of the other sad aspects about it was the funeral was coordinated by Gemma Thompson and Kate Nixon, two ladies who used to work for Manchester United until last year, and they are still serving the club with immense distinction, even though those tethers were officially severed in 2024. And it was impossible to not mention that or to not reference that, because, as I said, they're still a credit to their club, even though they're not officially part of that club anymore, which is a great shame. But that is on INEOS, and that, I suppose, does segue rather delicately or indelicately to more mooted redundancies at Manchester United. This has been in the works for a while now. I was certainly told by a couple of contacts a couple of months ago that more redundancies were likely. With such a sensitive matter, it's difficult to stand it up as far as the story is concerned. United also have their favoured conduits that they tend to communicate things to, or INEOS tend to communicate things to, and that's how these things can come to light eventually. But it did feel, certainly speaking frankly, on Monday, where I saw that it was going to be a quiet week, I did wonder, well, is this a week to chase up the probability or possibility of more redundancies at the club? That story did come to light on Tuesday evening, and not really a good look at all that it came to light on the day of Law's funeral, which, as I said, was coordinated by two women who were laid off by Manchester United last year. And you look at the workforce this time last year at United, I think it was 1,112 staff members. That was too bloated. And of course, there have to be decisions made, difficult decisions, where the club have got to comply with profitability and sustainability rules, where they have lost £300 million over the last 3-year period as well. That was unsustainable. I completely get that. There has been financial mismanagement by the past regime. Richard Arnold, who of course was the chief executive before Omar Barada, he was at Dennis Law's funeral the other day as well. Ed Woodward was at Sir Bobby Charlton's funeral in November 2023, but those two made a hell of a lot of mistakes. And where PSR has come into play, United are starting to struggle, and that's why they're looking at some bargain basement buys, if you like, in Aidan Heaven, who only cost a compensation fee, and Patrick Dorgu, who cost a relatively economical £25 million rising to £29 million from Lecce, and you might see a lot more deals like that in the summer. If Manchester United qualify for the Champions League, then they'll have the opportunity to spend more. But that's the problem. Certainly under INEOS, there are cuts left, right, and centre, but it is all undermined by them squandering tens of millions of pounds, whether it be extending a manager's contract, when the manager should have been sacked in the summer. And then when it came to sacking him, it meant he was entitled to a bigger compensation package, or whether it's misspending tens of millions of pounds on signings in the summer who shouldn't have been signed. So when you're saving on salaries of about £40,000 or £50,000 a year, and then you're paying these expensive duds, God knows how much on a weekly basis. I mean, Anthony, for example, was on 200 grand a week at United, is on 200 grand a week at United. They are saving on that at the moment, where he's playing for Real Betis on loan. But the whole cost-cutting measures are really undermined by some really bad mistakes that INEOS have already made. Dan Ashworth would have got a compensation fee, and that may come out in the next round of accounts, which are due to be published later this month. Ten Hag's specific payoff should be listed in those accounts as well. So that it's going to be millions that they could easily have saved, in inverted commas, had they made better and more obvious decisions. But as we've seen during INEOS's rather unedifying first year, they have made a lot of very, very bad decisions, and Manchester United have become a bad football team. They've become worse than they were last season. And yes, some of the problems are deep rooted, and INEOS have inherited some of those problems, but they have also been the cause for a lot of those problems. There are some staff at United that had decided to leave before the news of the redundancies came to light in the press this week. Good people that we deal with on a weekly basis, who we like as well. And this is the sad reality. It's starting to feel like it will get to a point at United where you wonder, is anybody likable going to be left in the building? It's not pleasant when you see people that you do care about on a human level and a professional level leaving, whether it be a case of them being forced out, or whether it be a case that they've just had enough and they don't like the working environment anymore. So it's not a pleasant time for a lot of people at Manchester United. There are, every case is very different. Of course, it was very public that Jackie Kay, I think that the player team manager, I can't quite remember what her title was, but essentially she is, I'll just get it up very quickly, head of team operations, which sounds quite grand. But essentially she has always travelled with the team. She will sort travel, booking players into the hotel, giving them their train tickets, etc. Just those logistics. And she's been at the club for, I think, 29 years. So it's a hell of a lot of good service. But I saw a description of her in the Times this week, that she was the oil in the machine. As a friend, a season ticket holder friend, said to me, if she was the oil in the machine, then it couldn't have been a well-oiled machine, because look at the state of play at United. And I don't disagree with the club taking certain measures if it's going to be in the best interests of the club going forward. It does feel like that they have targeted a lot of people who've been at the club for a long, long time, who have got at least a quarter of a century of service under their belt, and that was certainly the case with Gemma Thompson, who I referenced earlier. John Allen, the former press officer who left earlier this season as well, he'd worked at the club for 25 years as well, I think it was, more or less. Started out in the ticket office. So a lot of people whose the only place they've ever worked has been Manchester United are now leaving Manchester United because of these rather callous cuts. I agree that some cost cutting measures were absolutely necessary. We go on pre-season tours and we see people who work for the club on these pre-season tours that we never ever see ever again throughout the course of the season. You feel like, is that existence justified at the club? It did become too excessive under Ed Woodward and Rich Darnold, and okay, scaling back is essential, and especially if Manchester United don't qualify whatsoever for Europe next season, then cuts will be left, right, and centre, and that extends to the first team as well, because you can't have a squad of nearly 30 first team players if you're not going to have any European football. You're going to have to whittle that squad down to probably fewer than 25 outright first team players. I'm talking about players who have been bought specifically for the first team, are on first team salaries. You cannot have 25 players doing that. There's just no justification for it. You saw that was the case in 2014-15 when United had no European football and Louis van Gaal came in. So many players left that summer. Not a lot of players of great repute, maybe one or two. Danny Welbeck certainly springs to mind, Shinji Kagawa, Javier Hernandez. They either left permanently or, in Hernandez's case, left on loan. And that was because, one, there was a squad rebuild going on, but also Van Gaal knew that he couldn't have a big bloated squad. It needed to be quite lean because of the situation with the fixtures that season. And of course, United went out of the League Cup at the second round. They got thumped 4-0 at MK Dons, so they only had one League Cup game. That was at the right all the way back in August, and Van Gaal pretty much threw the game with the team he played. I think it's a badge of honour for those who were there for that fast. But it's a good quiz question if you can name the team off the top of my head. This is just to indulge you, I suppose. I'm honestly not looking as well. If you watch this on YouTube, I'm definitely not looking, even though I've got my browser up. I think De Gea, Yanko, Evans. I'll give up this. Anderson played. I don't think Adnan Januzaj even started that game necessarily. Michael Keane certainly did. I think Reece James did. Shinji Kagawa definitely did. I'll give up there, but if you can whittle all the names off, David De Gea was certainly an incongruous selection that night, but that gave you an idea of what Louis van Gaal thought of Anders Lindegaard. But I digress. Going back to the current squad, if United don't have European football next season, then they can't have the squad size that they have at the moment, and it's a relatively lean squad size, particularly in the attacking department, which has been halved from 8 forwards at the start of the season to 4 now that Ethan Wheatley, Anthony, and Marcus Rashford are out on loan, as is Jadon Sancho as well. United this weekend, as you'll all be aware, I'm sure, are away to Tottenham. They've not actually won at Spurs since, I think it was October 2021. So that was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's last win as United manager. Until recently, it was his last win in management, until he took over at Besiktas. So United are back at Spurs. I think they've drawn one and lost their last two. Drawn one and lost 2 in their past 3 games. There, the most recent one being the League Cup tie. It sounds like Spurs will have some players back. I mean, in terms of injuries at Tottenham, I don't know about you, but they seem to have been making a hell of a lot more noise about that than United were last season, and it was loud enough for us hearing Eric Ten Hag go on about injuries, say about never having his best 11 available, but then saying, "Oh, it's a squad game," just contradicting himself. You've got to put up with it. Injuries are inevitable, especially where there've been so many issues dating back to the restart after the COVID-19 pandemic. You've had short gaps between seasons. You've had European Championship, Copa America in the summer of 2021, Nations League games being played until mid-June in 2022, a World Cup in the middle of the season in 22-23. The summers seem to get shorter, it feels like, with pre-season tours and their start dates. Another Euros last year. AFCON, of course, was in the middle of last season as well. We've got another World Cup next year, and we've got a Club World Cup for a lot of players as well at the end of this season. I think somebody said the other night, if Manchester City were to play in every game possible between now and the end of their season, some players could play up to 74 games. That is ridiculous. It's unsustainable, and it doesn't feel like there's any end in sight, because that clown Gianni Infantino wants the 2030 or the 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia. So that's going to be another winter where club football shuts down to accommodate another World Cup in a Gulf state. and there's only a reason why it's going there. It's because of the money. We all know that it's pretty unedifying. But Infantino is a pretty unedifying individual, and unfortunately, there are far too many similarities between him and his predecessor at FIFA, Sepp Blatter. But as I said earlier, this podcast is being recorded before Ruben Amorim's press conference, so any kind of team news will seep out there. I don't think there's any real major team news to be plugged in for, unless he has something to offer up. Simon Peach is back after his long honeymoon. It feels like Sir Jim Ratcliffe spends more days in England than Simon Peach does these days, but he's back, so rest assured he will be asking the question about Johnny Evans, having been the last person to ask about Johnny Evans in Pilsen. That's become something of an in-joke. I don't think Johnny Evans has played much since then. I'm not sure if he's actually played since it's probably the Tottenham game when he got that late goal. So I didn't think I'd be mentioning Johnny Evans in this podcast, but there he is, cropping up despite still being out injured and unavailable for Ruben Amorim. In terms of the coverage this weekend, there'll be the usual live blog. We'll have two at the game, myself and Tyrone Marshall. One of us will be in the post-match press conference. One of us will be in the mix zone. So there'll be plenty to glean from one of the best stadiums in the world. Never mind England. It is if you've not been able to get to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, even for United game, if you can get to it at some point, even if you like NFL, because of course it hosts NFL matches, then it is well worth the trip. It's obviously it's not in the best of parts of London. I think Spurs fans would agree, but it is Tottenham, and it was quite reassuring making that walk up the Seven Sisters Road for the League Cup tie in December, seeing parts where you could identify where White Hart Lane used to be. White Hart Lane was a great ground for colour because the press box used to be right next to the tunnel, so you saw a hell of a lot. And I was there in press, I think 3 or 4 times for United games during White Hart Lane's final years, and unlike West Ham in 2016, the send off for White Hart Lane was very classily done. That was a really well way of celebrating White Hart Lane. And of course, next week United will be going to Goodison Park for the final time, which I think will be quite emotional for some United fans, even if they try and pretend that they're quite hardened figures. It's a great ground, Goodison Park. Again, the press box there, it is very cramped. If you're slightly overweight, you're going to have a problem. Fortunately, I tried to stay as trim as possible, so we should be okay. Myself and Steven Railston. He's not been to Goodison, so it's a great one for him to go to. But we're thoroughly looking forward to that. But first things first, it is Tottenham on Sunday, and we'll be across the board with that. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with another one of these on Monday to look back at what went on at Tottenham.